Thank you. I want to introduce someone who's defended the interest of working families in Pennsylvania in our communities across the country. And I just wanted to mention one of his recent accomplishments. He recently led the charge to restore mine worker health care benefits, which was severely threatened. As he comes in, I hope you'll give him a hand, because thousands and thousands of mine workers were going to run out of their benefits, and there would have been yet one more disaster. He also worked with Senators Warren and Brown to institutionalize layoff reversion as part of the new Workforce Investment Act reauthorization. So now every state in the country will have to ask the question, how do we set up a layoff reversion program to monitor and predict and prevent plant closings and mass layoffs, which is a great, great new development that was just accomplished a little over 2 years ago. So with that, I want to introduce Senator Bob Casey from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Well, thanks very much, Tom. How much time do I have?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. I was running late, and I was grateful to hear Congresswoman Kaptur. I've known her a long time and respected her work for even longer in her time in the United States House of Representatives, and she covered probably a lot of the same topics, so I won't try not to be redundant, but I did want to thank in particular the Century Foundation and also the Schwartz Rediscovering Government Initiative, and so many others who made this appearance possible. I'll try to do two things. One is to go through kind of a list that you already know a good bit about and that your distinguished panel, I know, will get to if you haven't already begun discussions about, and then maybe amplify a few issues that I think are central to the question of how do we grow wages, how do we deal with what I would argue, at least on the domestic side of our challenges, the greatest challenge we face. If the data is in any way accurate, one study, for example, telling us that between World War II or post-World War II, 1948 to 1973, wages went up something like 91%, as productivity was going up 97%, an almost perfect alignment between wages and productivity. But that alignment completely disintegrated starting in 1973 to the present. So you have 25 years of 91% wage growth followed by 40 years of 11% wage growth. You've seen other studies and other data that would confirm that or put a different, cast a different interpretation on it. But we have a major wage problem in the United States of America. We've had it for a long time, but it's, I think a lot of that trauma and suffering and anxiety played out in last year's election. You don't have to be a political combatant to understand that. If that second number I mentioned is in any way accurate, you had 11% wage growth, and it took place over 4 decades. You've got a problem. Both political parties have a problem. Both political parties have not done enough to address that problem for years. I would argue the party I'm in has done a hell of a lot more. We could debate that. But we have a major challenge, and we don't want to be standing here another 40 years from now and say the same thing, that over the course of 80 years, 8 decades, wages only went up 11%. Hell, if it's 20, it wouldn't be good enough. We have to figure out a way to address this problem. And unfortunately, sometimes the structures of our government, the process of getting bills enacted into law or policy changed, isn't necessarily conducive to that. Partisanship adds other substantial impediments to that. But I was especially impressed by the broad, and I won't recite every topic, but you were going to address manufacturing, technological innovation, apprenticeships, career and technical education, targeted investments. Of course, underneath or as part of all those are a list of issues you've heard about over many years, but are still front burner issues, or should be, in Washington. Raising the minimum wage, making sure that the gains on overtime that the last administration put forth are preserved. By the way, decades late in getting to that issue of overtime. The trade challenges we have that Representative Kaptur talked about. One of the problems I think we have as a country is we really don't have a trade platform or a trade policy. We go from trade deal to trade deal, fight like hell about it, and then go back into our corners awaiting the next trade deal to have another fight about. It would be better if we had a platform that was as rock solid as you can get on the environment and on labor rights and a whole long list of protections that our workers need so that we're not competing on an unlevel playing field, even in the negotiations, let alone when the policy is in effect. Tax reform is going to affect wages, obviously. If we go in the direction that some people want here, that there, and I say this seriously, not just to take a shot here, I believe the health care bill that they're trying to pass, as well as the tax reform idea that's nowhere near a bill yet, both are designed intentionally to give the super rich a lot more money. I don't think you have to be a partisan to say that. I think it's pretty evident from the legislation. So there are two opportunities that one party has with a majority to make life better for people whose wages haven't grown. And I would argue on the health care bill and on the tax reform bill, they're not helping this problem at all. Unfortunately, that for us here, even if we get the policy right, and that's a hell of a hard task to get this policy right. As I said, neither party has done enough for many, many years, many decades even. But even if you get the policy right, even if you have a chance of enactment of a policy or a new law, if we don't get if we don't focus, I should say, on what's in people's hearts and their guts, the policy won't matter too much. Most of the frustration out there today is not that policies aren't working. There's certainly some of that. But a lot of the frustration out there is neither party gives a damn about them. So giving a damn and demonstrating that is very important in this process. And that's when you don't connect with people as a political party, and I would argue my party hasn't done this in a long time either. I think we've done a lot of good things, but we haven't connected with a huge slice of the American people. And until we fix that problem, they're not going to really listen to our policy arguments. If they don't think we give a damn about them, they're not going to listen to our speeches about the minimum wage or trade or anything else. If they don't think we give a damn about their future and understand as best we can, even though we haven't lived through it, most of us, I certainly haven't lived through years of wages being hacked to death and trauma all around me, whether it's economic devastation or the opioid problem or the impact of bad trade deals. If I haven't lived through that, I have to at least try to understand it, and to understand their struggles, to understand their anxieties, and to understand that they are worried about the future, not only their own present economic circumstances. So before we even get to the policy, I'm just preaching to my own party here. I'm allowed to do that because I'm one of them, and I'll share my part of the blame. We've got to be able to connect with people and try to understand what they're up against. And when we don't do that, and the other party doesn't do that over a long period of time, guess what? They choose door number 3, which for many was an act of utter desperation, but they did it anyway, with all kinds of reservations, with all kinds of worries when they were pushing that button. And of course, now they're seeing what was behind door number 3. But it's not good enough for us to go back to them and try to persuade them that you made the wrong choice here. We don't need to persuade them of that. We need to show them that we're on their side, that we understand what they're up against, and we're trying to make things better. Let me, and I know we're low on time, let me just go through a few things. One area where we could make a difference is making sure we focus on Perkins Career and Technical Education. That program, I know, in our state provides about $25 million for high schools, just in Perkins funds, and almost $11 million for post-secondary institutions. We've got to make progress on that. It's been very difficult to make bipartisan progress on that, but we're working on that, and I say that speaking to both Democrats and Republicans trying to get there. Some people in this room helped us with legislation that I've introduced, which focuses on one of the consequences of not dealing with the wage problem, one of the consequences of the ravages of the changes in our economy, and that's what happened. What do we do for a community when an entire industry is wiped out, or when they have such adverse impact from bad trade deals or adverse impacts because of trade policy? What do we do for them? Well, I introduced Senate Bill 142. It's called the Community Economic Assistance Act, and here's what it does. It would focus on communities that, as I said, were impacted by trade, impacted by a large job loss, or a localized recession. Here are the categories. The job loss, it would have to be 250 jobs or more. The other category is a community impacted by trade. Third category is a community transitioning from an energy-based economy. It could be coal or otherwise. What happens to a community when they have to deal with that? And then fourth, whether the community is experiencing a significant localized recession. Now, in those instances, we would make that community designated by the governor of the state, nominated by the governor, but designated by the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Labor. That community, upon designation, would be eligible for a $100 million bond. I should say allowed to issue a $100 million bond issue, 100% tax credit. It could be eligible for other federal government assistance. They would have to enact a community development plan that would give them and the people they represent an outline of a game plan. Additional $500 million a year in new market tax credit allocation for the country would make other support available. We'd also support existing employers with an employment credit of up to $3,000 per employee within a designated region. So it goes on from there, but you get the drift of it. It is a way to target substantial help to a community that's been hit very hard. And I realize that in that instance it comes after the fact when there's job loss or economic devastation. But it's one way for the federal government to respond affirmatively, to be a full partner and not just a bystander. The last thing I'll say, and I know we have to go, is the Federal Reserve put out a report recently that I think raises some critically important issues about the lives of these workers, the trauma or at least the anxiety that they live with every day. Some of the numbers are startling. 32% of adults saw their income vary to some degree from month to month. Almost a third of the American workforce. 13% struggle to pay bills in some months due to that income volatility. Another finding was 44% of adults say they either could not cover an emergency expense costing $400. That's 44% of adults saying that. So there are still far too many Americans that struggle day to day. So many of them don't believe that the outcome of last year's election, or frankly the outcome of several elections, speaks to that anxiety, that devastation, that trauma that they feel, and it's made worse when they believe that their lives or their children's lives will not be better than their own. We've never lived in the last 100 years in a period of time when that number of people believing the country is headed in the wrong direction, which, by the way, has been a negative number since 9/11, or since 2001, I should say. Sometime that year it began to flip. So that's the pessimism that's out there. And secondly, we've never experienced, I think, the kind of high number when it comes to people believing that their child's or their children's lives or their grandchildren's lives will be better than their own. So thereby dampening or extinguishing that sense of aspiration, that sense of forward progress that we've always been able to depend upon. And I think a lot of that is tied up in wages. I think a lot of the wrong direction number is tied up in wages. So we've got a major task ahead of us, and the policy agenda, you'd probably have to enact a long list of policy items to get there. I don't underestimate the difficulty, but part of the way we get there is by understanding what's in people's guts and what their fears are, but also what their hopes are for a better America. Nothing is more important in terms of our domestic agenda than getting to these wage issues. And as difficult as it is, and as challenging a mission as it is, I think it's a mission worthy of a great country. Thank you very much.